The shuttle's engines hummed their final notes as Captain Marcus Vale stepped onto the crystalline landing platform of Zephyria Prime. The air tasted of copper and ozone, heavy with the residue of plasma weapons that had scarred this world for 3 centuries. His diplomatic corps uniform, pristine navy blue with silver threading, felt almost insulting against the backdrop of a civilization at war with itself. Marcus had seen dozens of conflict zones across the galaxy, but nothing quite like this. The planet's surface shimmered with an otherworldly beauty even in its devastation. Crystalline spires rose from the earth like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the dual suns in prismatic cascades. Yet many of these natural monuments bore the black scars of energy weapons, their perfect symmetry shattered by centuries of hatred. Ambassador Vale, a melodious voice called from behind him. Marcus turned to see his escort approaching, a tall, elegant figure whose appearance made his breath catch in his throat. The being was undeniably feminine in form, though distinctly alien. Her skin held a subtle luminescence, like pearls viewed underwater, and shifted through shades of silver and pale blue as she moved. Most striking were her eyes, large, multifaceted like cut gems, shifting between deep violet and brilliant amber depending on the light. "I am Lady Thessarian, first speaker of the Crystal Courts," she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Marcus's chest. "Princess Nyxera awaits your arrival, though I must warn you, she is not what your kind might expect from royalty." Marcus fell into step beside her as they moved through the spaceport. Even in ruins, the architecture was breathtaking. Every surface seemed to have grown rather than been built, flowing organic curves that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. "I try not to have expectations," he replied diplomatically. "They tend to limit understanding." Thessarian's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. "Wise words. Though I suspect the princess will challenge that philosophy." They traversed the city in a hover transport that glided silently between the towering crystal formations. Marcus observed everything with a trained eye, noting the clear demarcation between territories. The crystal courts controlled the eastern sectors, where the natural crystal formations grew in orderly, almost geometric patterns. To the west, he glimpsed the Shadow Clan territories, where the crystals grew wild and dark, twisted into organic, almost predatory shapes. "The division runs deeper than architecture," Thessarian observed, following his gaze. "Our peoples evolved from the same source, but chose different paths of enhancement. The crystal courts embrace order, logic, the perfection of form. The Shadow Clans prize adaptability, passion, the strength found in chaos. And neither can exist without the other," Marcus noted. "Classic symbiotic conflict. You need their adaptability to survive, they need your stability to thrive." "Precisely. Yet pride blinds both sides to this truth." The transport began to ascend toward a magnificent palace that seemed to grow from the largest crystal formation on the continent. "The princess has long advocated for reconciliation, but her position is precarious. Many view her compassion as weakness." The Palace of Resonance defied every architectural principle Marcus knew. It existed in impossible dimensions, rooms flowing into one another without clear boundaries, corridors that seemed to bend space itself. Thessarian guided him through hallways where the walls sang with harmonic frequencies, past chambers where holographic histories played out the glory days before the war. "She's in the Harmony Chamber," Thessarian said, pausing before an entrance that seemed more grown than carved. "A word of caution, Ambassador. Our princess is intense. She experiences emotion more deeply than most of our kind. Some consider it a flaw. Others believe it's exactly what our world needs." Marcus nodded, squaring his shoulders as he entered the chamber beyond. The room took his breath away. It was spherical, its walls composed entirely of living crystal that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. The floor was a pool of something that looked like liquid starlight, perfectly solid beneath his feet yet seeming to ripple with each step. At the chamber's center, on a raised dais of white crystal, stood Princess Nyxera. Marcus had studied her holographic profile during the journey, but nothing had prepared him for her presence. She was tall and graceful like her species, but where most Zephyrians seemed coolly elegant, she radiated warmth. Her skin shifted through warmer tones, rose gold, soft amber, pearl touched with sunrise. Her multifaceted eyes held depths that seemed to see straight through to his soul. But it was her expression that truly caught him off guard. Where he'd expected royal composure, he found raw vulnerability. She stood with her hands clasped before her, studying him with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly overwhelming. "Ambassador Vale," she said, her voice carrying the same harmonics as her people but with an emotional resonance that made his pulse quicken. "I confess, I had hoped for someone older. More traditional." Marcus raised an eyebrow, amused despite the gravity of the situation. "Disappointed, Your Highness." A smile played at the corners of her lips, an expression that transformed her entire face from beautiful to radiant. "Quite the opposite. Traditional diplomacy has failed us for 3 centuries. Perhaps what we need is someone young enough to see new possibilities." She descended from the dais with fluid grace, and Marcus found himself holding his breath as she approached. Her scent reached him, something like night-blooming jasmine mixed with the clean smell of rain on crystal. When she stopped before him, close enough that he could see the individual facets in her remarkable eyes, he felt an electric tension that had nothing to do with diplomacy. "Tell me," she said softly, "what do you see when you look at our world?" Marcus considered the question seriously, aware that his answer would set the tone for everything that followed. "I see incredible beauty shaped by incredible pain. 2 peoples who've forgotten they're part of the same symphony, fighting over who gets to play the melody." Nyxera's eyes widened, their color shifting toward brilliant gold. "A symphony," she repeated. "Yes, that's exactly right. We were once known as the resonance worlds because of how our crystals harmonize with each other. Now that harmony is broken. But not beyond repair," Marcus said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Nothing truly beautiful is ever completely lost." The princess stepped closer, and Marcus felt the heat radiating from her luminous skin. In the dancing light of the crystal chamber, she seemed almost ethereal, yet her presence was undeniably real and affecting. "The Shadow clans have agreed to meet with you," she said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Prince Zephyr himself will attend. That hasn't happened in 50 years. What changed their minds?" Nyxera's smile turned mysterious. "I told them you were dangerous." Marcus laughed, genuinely delighted. "Dangerous how?" "You make people hope," she replied, her hand coming up to rest lightly on his chest. The contact sent electricity through his uniform. "Hope is the most dangerous thing you can give someone who's spent centuries in despair." The touch lingered longer than diplomatic protocol suggested it should. Marcus found himself studying the alien beauty of her features, noting how her skin seemed to pulse with gentle light where it touched his uniform. Her eyes had shifted to deep violet, and he realized he was beginning to read the emotional spectrum of her coloring. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "I should mention that human diplomatic protocols have certain limitations when it comes to cross-species interactions." "Oh." She tilted her head, genuinely curious. "What sort of limitations?" "The kind that become problematic when I find myself attracted to the person I'm supposed to be helping." The admission hung in the air between them like a challenge. Nyxera's eyes shifted through a rapid spectrum of colors: surprise, pleasure, uncertainty, and something that looked remarkably like desire. "Interesting," she said finally. "Because Zephyrian diplomatic customs actually encourage personal connections. We believe you cannot truly understand someone you haven't allowed yourself to feel something for." "That could complicate things," Marcus observed, though he made no move to step away from her touch. "Or simplify them entirely," she replied. "After all, what is war but a failure of understanding? And what is understanding but the willingness to see through another's eyes?" Before he could respond, a harmonic chime echoed through the chamber. Thessarian's voice followed, carrying an urgent undertone. "Your Highness, the Shadow Clan delegation has arrived early. Prince Zephyr requests immediate audience." Nyxera's hand fell away from Marcus's chest, but her eyes remained locked on his. "It seems our philosophical discussion will have to wait. Are you ready to meet the other half of our broken symphony?" Marcus straightened his uniform and offered his arm, pleased when she accepted it with natural grace. "Lead the way, Your Highness. Time to see if we can tune this orchestra." As they left the harmony chamber together, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just crossed a line from which there would be no returning. The princess's touch had awakened something in him that went far beyond professional interest, and the way she looked at him suggested the feeling might be mutual. In the complex dance of interspecies diplomacy, personal attraction was always a complication. But as they walked toward what could be the most important meeting in Zephyrian history, Marcus found himself thinking that some complications might be worth the risk. The grand assembly hall of the Palace of Resonance had been designed to intimidate. Crystalline walls soared toward a domed ceiling that captured and amplified every sound, turning whispers into declarations and silence into its own form of statement. Princess Nyxera led Marcus through the towering doors, her luminous skin now shifting toward cooler blues, a sign of tension he was beginning to recognize. The Shadow Clan delegation had already taken their positions on the far side of the hall, a stark contrast to the ordered beauty of the Crystal Court attendants. Where Nyxera's people moved with precise grace, the Shadow Clan representatives seemed to flow like living darkness, their forms shifting subtly as Marcus watched. Their leader stood apart from the rest, and Marcus felt his breath catch for entirely different reasons than when he'd first seen the princess. Prince Zephyr was undeniably masculine in a way that transcended species boundaries. Tall and broad-shouldered, his skin held the deep charcoal hues of his people but with an underlying luminescence that seemed to pulse with barely contained energy. His eyes were striking, solid silver with no visible pupils, yet Marcus could feel the intelligence behind that alien gaze studying him with predatory intensity. "So," Zephyr said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate from the walls themselves, "this is the human who thinks he can solve what we could not." He moved forward with fluid steps, each movement carrying a controlled power that spoke of both nobility and danger. "You're smaller than I expected." Marcus stepped forward to meet him, refusing to be intimidated despite the alien prince's imposing presence. "Size isn't everything, Your Highness. Sometimes the smallest change can shift the largest system." Zephyr's silver eyes flashed with what might have been amusement. Spoken like someone who has never faced true opposition. He circled Marcus slowly, a predator assessing prey. "Tell me, little diplomat, what do you know of strength?" "I know it comes in many forms," Marcus replied evenly, turning to keep Zephyr in sight. "The strength to destroy is common. The strength to build something better is rare. And the strength to admit when you're wrong?" Zephyr asked, stopping directly in front of Marcus. Up close, the alien prince was even more imposing, radiating heat and intensity that made Marcus's pulse quicken in ways he didn't entirely understand. "That's the rarest strength of all," Marcus admitted. For a long moment, Zephyr studied him with those unsettling silver eyes. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, an expression that transformed his harsh features into something almost beautiful. "Perhaps you are not as soft as you appear." Princess Nyxera stepped forward, her colors shifting toward warmer golds. "Zephyr, please. The ambassador has come here to help us find peace." "Peace," Zephyr repeated, his attention shifting to the princess with an intensity that made Marcus feel oddly excluded. "You speak of peace as if it were something simple, Nyxera. As if 3 centuries of blood could be washed away with pretty words." "Not pretty words," Nyxera replied, moving closer to both men. "Understanding. Connection. The willingness to see past old wounds to new possibilities." Marcus found himself caught between them, acutely aware of the tension that flowed like electricity between the two alien nobles. There was history here, layers of complexity that went far beyond political alliance. The way they looked at each other spoke of intimate knowledge, shared experiences, and something that might have once been love. "You propose we forget the past?" Zephyr asked, his silver eyes never leaving Nyxera's face. "I propose we choose a different future," she replied softly. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we could begin with understanding the present. What would it take for both factions to consider a ceasefire? Zefan's laugh was harsh. You think this is about territory? Resources? Political power? Isn't it? Marcus asked. Show him, Nyxera said quietly. Show him what we've really been fighting about. Zefan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. But not here. Not in this place of cold crystal and formal protocol. If the human wishes to understand, he must see with more than his eyes. An hour later, Marcus found himself in quarters he hadn't expected, Nyxera's private chambers deep within the palace. The space was unlike anything he'd seen in the formal areas. Here, the crystal walls pulsed with warm bioluminescence, creating patterns that seemed to respond to the princess's emotions. Comfortable seating areas were arranged around pools of living light, and the air carried the same intoxicating floral scent he'd noticed when they first met. This is irregular, he pointed out as Nyxera moved through the space with unconscious grace, her skin shifting toward rose gold in the intimate lighting. Zephyrian diplomacy is different from human customs, she replied, settling onto a curved couch that seemed to mold itself to her form. We believe you cannot truly know someone until you've shared their private space, seen them as they truly are rather than how they present themselves to the world. Zefan emerged from what Marcus assumed was a bathing chamber, his appearance startlingly different. Gone were the formal robes of state, replaced by simple clothing that revealed the lean strength of his alien physiology. His skin seemed to glow with subdued energy, and when he moved, Marcus caught glimpses of intricate patterns beneath the surface, like living tattoos that shifted and flowed with his emotions. Comfortable, Ambassador? Zefan asked, settling onto the couch beside Nyxera with casual intimacy that made Marcus's chest tighten with an emotion he didn't want to examine too closely. Getting there, Marcus replied, taking a seat across from them. The furniture adjusted to his human proportions automatically, another sign of the advanced technology woven seamlessly into every aspect of Zephyrian life. Nyxera reached for a crystalline decanter filled with liquid that seemed to contain trapped starlight. This is Keth, she explained, pouring 3 glasses. It helps lower mental barriers, allows for deeper communication. Essential for true understanding. Marcus accepted the glass cautiously. What kind of barriers? The ones that keep us from feeling what others feel, Zefan said, his silver eyes studying Marcus intently. Your species is naturally empathic, but you've learned to suppress it for survival. Keth temporarily removes those suppressions. Is that safe? Marcus asked, though he was already raising the glass to his lips. The liquid tasted like moonlight might, cool, clean, with an effervescent quality that made his nerve endings tingle. Safe. Nyxera laughed, a sound like crystal chimes. Perhaps not. But necessary if you're to understand what divides us. The effect was gradual but unmistakable. Marcus felt his awareness expanding, becoming acutely conscious of the emotions radiating from his companions. Nyxera's feelings were a warm cascade of hope, desire, and deep sadness. Zefan's were more complex, layers of anger, pride, longing, and underneath it all, a love so profound it took Marcus's breath away. You love her, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Zefan's expression didn't change, but Marcus felt the spike of pain that lanced through him. Love is not always enough. It should be, Nyxera whispered, her luminous skin shifting toward deep blue. Tell me, Marcus said, the Keth making him bold. What really happened between your peoples? Nyxera and Zefan exchanged a look loaded with history. We were bonded once, she said finally. Not just politically, but personally. The joining of Crystal Court precision with Shadow Clan passion was supposed to usher in a new age of harmony. But harmony requires balance, Zefan continued, his voice rough with old pain. And balance requires trust. When the first accusations of betrayal surfaced, everything fell apart. Marcus felt their shared anguish as if it were his own. What kind of betrayal? The kind that destroys souls, Nyxera replied. I was accused of using our bond to gather intelligence for my faction. Zephyr was accused of the same. Neither accusation was true, but by the time we realized we were being manipulated, the damage was done. 3 centuries of war because someone wanted to keep you apart, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him along with a surge of anger that wasn't entirely his own. 3 centuries of war because we were too proud to fight for what mattered most, Zephyr corrected, his silver eyes finding Nixera's multifaceted ones. Because we chose duty over love. The silence that followed was heavy with regret and possibility. Marcus found himself studying both aliens with new appreciation, seeing past their exotic beauty to the pain they carried. The Keth had opened pathways in his mind that made their emotions as real to him as his own, and what he felt from them was breathtaking in its intensity. You still love each other, he observed. Love was never the question, Nixera said softly. The question was always whether love could overcome the fear of vulnerability. Marcus stood, moving to the chamber's large window that looked out over the divided city. Below, the crystal formations of both territories caught the light of the setting suns, creating a display of almost unbearable beauty. What if I told you there was a way to rebuild that trust? A method that would make deception impossible? What do you mean? Zephyr asked, rising to join him at the window. Marcus felt the alien prince's heat beside him, caught the scent of something like warm amber and storm winds. The Keth made him hyper-aware of Zephyr's presence, the controlled power that radiated from his tall frame. Human diplomatic protocol includes something called a truth bond. It's rarely used because it requires complete emotional openness between all parties. Nixera appeared on his other side, her floral scent mingling with Zephyr's more masculine aroma in ways that made Marcus's head spin. What would such a bond entail? Complete honesty. Shared experiences. The willingness to be vulnerable with people who were once enemies. Marcus turned to face them both, acutely aware of how close they stood, how the Keth had lowered all their emotional barriers. It would mean trusting each other with not just political secrets, but personal ones. And you would be part of this bond? Zephyr asked, his silver eyes reflecting the sunset colors. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. The mediator becomes the anchor point. The neutral party that both sides can trust because they have no stake in the original conflict. But you do have a stake now, Nixera observed, her hand coming up to rest on his arm. Her touch sent electricity through his entire body, amplified by the Ketha's effects. Don't you? Marcus looked between them, the crystalline beauty of the princess and the dark intensity of the prince. Both watched him with expressions that held promise and challenge in equal measure. Yes, he admitted. I do. Zephyr's hand joined Nixera's on Marcus's other arm, the contact creating a circuit of sensation that made all 3 of them gasp. Then perhaps, the prince said, his voice dropping to something almost intimate, it's time we explored the full implications of Zephyrian diplomacy. The sun set over the divided city as 3 very different beings stood together at the window, connected by touch and possibility. Tomorrow would bring the formal negotiations, the careful dance of political compromise and strategic alliance. But tonight, in the private chambers of a princess who dared to hope, something far more complex and beautiful was beginning to take shape. Marcus had come to Zephyria to broker peace between warring factions. He was beginning to realize he might leave having discovered something far more precious, and far more dangerous, than he'd ever imagined possible. Prince Zephyr stood on the obsidian balcony of his ancestral stronghold, watching the first light of dawn paint the twisted crystal formations of Shadow Clan territory in shades of deep purple and gold. The night had changed everything. What had begun as political necessity in Nixera's chambers had evolved into something that defied every convention he'd known in his 3 centuries of life. The human, Marcus, had returned to his diplomatic quarters before dawn, but not before something fundamental had shifted between all 3 of them. The truth bond they'd begun was unlike anything in Zephyrian tradition, yet it felt as natural as breathing. Zephyr touched his chest where Marcus's hand had rested during their final embrace, still feeling the echo of the human's surprisingly strong heartbeat. My lord. The voice belonged to Carvex, his oldest advisor and the closest thing to family he had left. The elderly Shadow Clan noble approached with the careful deference of someone who had watched Zephyr grow from an idealistic youth into a hardened leader. The Council of Shadows awaits your report on the human diplomat. Zephyr didn't turn from his contemplation of the sunrise. Tell me, old friend, what do you know of human bonding customs? Carvex's eyebrows rose, literally, as the chitinous plates above his silver eyes shifted with surprise. Human customs, my lord. They are said to be possessive, territorial. They mate in pairs and guard their bonds jealously. Interesting. Zephyr finally turned, noting how his advisor's expression grew more concerned as he took in the prince's appearance. Zephyr knew what Carvex saw, the subtle luminescence of his skin that indicated deep emotional connection, the relaxed posture that spoke of contentment rather than the controlled tension that had defined him for decades. And what would you say if I told you that human customs might be more flexible than we assumed? I would say that you've discovered something that changes the equation entirely, Carvex replied carefully. The question is whether this change serves our people's interests. Zephyr moved to his private armory, selecting weapons more from habit than necessity. Today's negotiations would be conducted in the neutral grounds, a space station orbiting Zephyria's smaller moon, built specifically for interactions that neither faction could safely host. What if I told you that our people's interests might be better served by embracing change rather than fighting it? Then I would ask what the Crystal Court Princess has done to my pragmatic prince, Carvex said with a slight smile. And whether the human is truly as neutral as he claims. Zephyr paused in his weapon selection, a curved blade of living shadow crystal halfway to his belt. Carvex knew him too well. The human is unexpected. He sees connections where others see only division. And his presence seems to create possibilities that didn't exist before. Dangerous possibilities. The most dangerous kind, Zephyr admitted. The kind that make you hope. The journey to the neutral grounds took several hours aboard his personal transport, giving Zephyr time to prepare for what he knew would be the most crucial negotiation of his lifetime. The space station was a marvel of cooperative engineering, one of the few things both factions had built together during the brief peace talks 50 years ago. It hung in space like a geometric flower, its crystalline petals catching and refracting the light of distant stars. Marcus was already waiting in the main conference chamber when Zephyr arrived, and the sight of him sent an unexpected warmth through the prince's chest. The human diplomat wore formal attire that somehow managed to honor both Crystal Court and Shadow Clan aesthetics, structured like Nyxera's people preferred, but in colors that echoed the deeper hues of Zephyr's territory. Your Highness, Marcus said, offering a bow that was perfectly calibrated to show respect without deference. I trust your journey was peaceful. As peaceful as any journey can be when traveling toward the unknown, Zephyr replied, studying the human's face for signs of regret or uncertainty about the previous night's revelations. He found none, only a calm determination that somehow made Marcus even more attractive. Princess Nyxera arrived moments later, her usual escort replaced by a single advisor, a clear sign that she was prioritizing intimacy over ceremony. She wore robes that seemed to capture starlight, their surface shifting between silver and deep blue as she moved. When her eyes met Zephyr's across the chamber, he felt the familiar jolt of connection that had defined their relationship for centuries. Shall we begin? Marcus asked, gesturing toward the circular table at the chamber's center. The furniture was another compromise, crystalline like the Crystal Court's preferred, but shaped with the flowing organic curves favored by the Shadow Clans. As they took their seats, Zephyr found himself studying the dynamic between his two companions. The truth bond they'd begun the night before had created a triangle of awareness that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He could sense Marcus's diplomatic calm overlaying deeper currents of attraction and uncertainty. From Nyxera, he felt hope so bright it was almost painful, tempered by the fear that this chance might slip away like all the others. The situation has changed, Marcus began without preamble. Last night's cultural exchange has revealed possibilities that traditional diplomacy couldn't access. But it's also created complications that we need to address directly. Complications? Nixera asked, though her shifting colors suggested she knew exactly what he meant. The personal element, Zephyr said bluntly. The fact that all three of us are attracted to each other in ways that go beyond political alliance. Marcus nodded, clearly appreciating the direct approach. In human diplomacy, personal involvement is usually considered a conflict of interest. But your cultures seem to view it differently. Connection is the foundation of trust, Nixera explained, her hand moving to rest on the table between them. We cannot build lasting peace with people we don't truly know. And we cannot truly know someone without understanding what moves their heart, Zephyr added, his own hand joining hers on the table. The contact sent familiar electricity through both of them. Marcus stared at their joined hands for a long moment before placing his own over both of theirs. The gesture completed a circuit that all three of them felt, a harmony that seemed to resonate through the station's crystalline structure itself. There's something I need to tell you, Marcus said quietly. The truth bond, it's not just a human diplomatic tool. It's something more personal. More permanent. Zephyr felt Nixera's sharp intake of breath through their connection. What do you mean? It means that what we've started can't be undone. The neural pathways that allow us to sense each other's emotions will strengthen over time. Eventually, we'll be linked in ways that go far beyond normal empathy. Marcus's brown eyes met each of theirs in turn. It means choosing each other. All of us. Permanently. The silence that followed was charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Zephyr had spent 3 centuries believing that his chance for happiness had been destroyed by politics and pride. The idea that it might be restored, and expanded to include this remarkable human, was almost too much to process. The political implications, Nixera said finally, would be unprecedented, Zephyr finished. A 3-way bond between leaders of opposing factions and a neutral mediator. It could revolutionize how conflicts are resolved throughout the galaxy. Or it could be seen as the ultimate corruption of the diplomatic process, Marcus pointed out. My superiors would have concerns. Zephyr stood abruptly, pacing to the chamber's curved windows. Outside, Zephyria turned slowly in space, its crystal formations catching the light in patterns that seemed almost musical. What if we don't tell them? What if we simply present the results, peace between our peoples, an end to 3 centuries of war, and let the methods remain our secret? You're suggesting we lie to our own governments? Marcus asked. I'm suggesting we prioritize what works over what's expected, Zephyr replied, turning back to face them. The universe is full of conventional diplomacy. How's that working out? Nixera laughed, a sound that made both males' hearts race. He has a point. Traditional methods brought us 3 centuries of war. Perhaps it's time to try something unconventional. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his diplomatic training warring with feelings he was only beginning to understand. Finally, he nodded. There would need to be safeguards. Ways to ensure that personal feelings don't compromise our people's welfare. The bond itself is the safeguard, Zephyr said, returning to the table. Deception becomes impossible when you can feel each other's true emotions. Betrayal becomes unthinkable when you share each other's pain. And love? Nixera asked softly. What happens to love in such an arrangement? Zephyr reached for her hand, then extended his other hand to Marcus. When the human took it without hesitation, Zephyr felt a completeness he'd never experienced before. Love multiplies, he said simply. It doesn't divide. The formal negotiations that followed were unlike anything in diplomatic history. With their emotional barriers lowered and their hearts open to each other, the 3 of them crafted agreements that addressed not just territory and resources, but the deeper needs that had driven the conflict. Trade partnerships that would make both factions prosperous. Cultural exchange programs that would help each side understand the other. And most importantly, a new form of governance that honored both the Crystal Court's need for order and the Shadow Clan's desire for freedom. As the day wore on, their professional collaboration deepened their personal connection. Zephyr found himself admiring Marcus's ability to find creative solutions, the way his mind worked to build bridges rather than walls. And watching Nyxera's joy as ancient grievances were resolved made Zephyr's heart sing in ways he'd forgotten were possible. By evening, they had the framework for lasting peace. More than that, they had something unprecedented in galactic history, a three-way bond that transcended species, politics, and convention. So what happens now? Marcus asked as they prepared to return to their respective territories. Now we find out if love really can conquer politics, Nyxera replied, her skin glowing with warm gold tones. And if not? Marcus pressed. Zephyr smiled, an expression that transformed his harsh features into something beautiful. Then we make our own rules. As their ships departed the neutral grounds, each carrying signed agreements that would end centuries of war, the three unlikely lovers faced an uncertain future. The galaxy wasn't ready for what they'd discovered together. Their own peoples might not accept the unconventional solution they'd found. But as Zephyr felt the gentle pull of the bond that now connected him to both Marcus and Nyxera across the vast distances of space, he knew they'd found something worth fighting for. Something worth changing the universe for. The real negotiations, he realized, were just beginning.